Welcome to Quicklit, your gateway to book wisdom.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving deep into Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Oh, yeah.
Have you heard of this one?
Of course, this is a classic.
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a thick one too. I remember.
It's dense.
Yeah, when I first picked it up, I was like, oh boy.
It's a commitment.
Yeah, but so worth it. It's all about how our minds work, those two little voices in our heads.
Right.
One that's fast and intuitive, and then that other one that's slow and deliberate.
Exactly.
Have you ever noticed it in yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Like all the time. It's that constant battle between like my gut reaction and then trying to actually think things through.
Yeah. Yeah. And knowing how those mental processes work can really help us make better decisions, or at least understand why we make the decisions we do.
For sure. Like shining a light on all those mental shortcuts and biases we have.
Right. So how about we start with the foundation of the book? Those two systems of thinking.
Okay.
System 1 and System 2.
Sounds good.
What are those all about?
Well, so system 1, that's like our autopilot. It's fast, automatic, emotional,
Yeah.
intuitive, effortless, the kind of thinking that helps us navigate everyday life without, overthinking every little thing.
So it's like that first reaction?
Exactly. Like if you touch a hot stove and you instantly pull your hand back, that's system 1. It's also responsible for like those snap judgments we make about people or situations.
So that's why I sometimes judge a book by its cover, even though I know I shouldn't.
Exactly. System 1 is all about efficiency. It relies on mental shortcuts, which Kahneman calls heuristics, to make quick judgments.
But those shortcuts aren't always accurate, are they?
That's the catch.
Yeah.
They can lead to biases and errors because System 1 is more concerned with speed than accuracy.
Okay, so System 1 is kind of like the impulsive friend who always acts first and thinks later.
That's a great analogy.
What about System 2? Is that the voice of reason?
Yes, System 2 is more deliberate and analytical. It's engaged when we need to solve complex problems, analyze data, or make conscious choices. It's the system that helps us learn new things or plan for the future.
So if System 1 is the impulsive friend, then System 2 is the one who's always saying, hey, maybe we should think about this a little more.
Haha, exactly. But here's the thing. System 2 is also lazy. It prefers to conserve energy whenever possible. So it often relies on those System 1 shortcuts unless it absolutely have to step in.
So it's like a muscle that gets tired after too much use.
That's a perfect way to put it. And when System 2 is depleted, we're more susceptible to those System 1 biases.
So we're more likely to make impulsive decisions when we're tired, stressed, or distracted.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. This is fascinating stuff. I'm already starting to see how these two systems play out in my own life, but I have a feeling this is just the tip of the iceberg.
You're right. We've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole world of fascinating biases and heuristics that Kahneman explores in the book.
Okay, now I'm really intrigued. Let's dive into some of those biases.
Let's do it.
So we've got these two systems battling it out in our heads. System 1 loves those mental shortcuts, but they're not always so helpful, right?
Not always. No. And they can really trip us up sometimes, like with the representativeness heuristic.
Representativeness heuristic. That's a mouthful. What's that all about?
It's basically how we judge the probability of something based on how well it fits our stereotypes. We see someone who looks like a certain type of person, and we assume they must have certain characteristics.
So it's about making snap judgments based on appearances and stereotypes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Kahneman gives this great example in the book about a woman named Linda.
Oh, yeah, I remember this one.
So Linda's very outspoken, majored in philosophy, was deeply involved in social justice movements in college.
Okay, very politically active.
Right. So which is more likely, that Linda is a bank teller or that Linda is a bank teller and active in the feminist movement?
Well, based on that description, I'd say she's more likely to be a feminist bank teller. But something tells me that's not the right answer.
You're right. Most people fall into that trap. It seems more likely because it fits our stereotype of Linda, but statistically it's less likely. It's impossible for Linda is a feminist bank teller to be more probable than Linda is a bank teller.
Oh, right. Because every feminist bank teller is also a bank teller.
Exactly. It's like saying it's more likely for someone to be a professional basketball player, A&D over 7 feet tall, than just a professional basketball player.
I see. The added detail makes it seem more representative, but not actually more probable.
Right. And this heuristic can really lead us astray in all sorts of situations, like when we're making hiring decisions or judging someone's character.
Yeah, I can see how that could be a problem. We need to be careful not to let those stereotypes cloud our judgment.
Absolutely.
You okay?
Okay, so moving on to another bias that can really mess with our thinking.
Anchoring.
Anchoring. What's that one about?
It's how an initial number can influence our estimates even if that number is completely random.
Oh, like if someone asks me to guess how many jelly beans are in a jar and they start by saying, I bet there are at least 500. Exactly. Studies show that people's guesses tend to be higher if they're first exposed to a high anchor, even if they know it's irrelevant.
So it's like our brains get stuck on that first number and we adjust our estimates from there.
Yeah, it's as if the anchor sets a reference point and our subsequent judgments are pulled towards it.
That's sneaky. I can see how that could be used to manipulate people, like in negotiations or sales.
Definitely something to watch out for.
Hmm.
Now let's talk about something even more unsettling, the illusion of understanding.
Illusion of understanding. That sounds kind of ominous. What is that?
It's our tendency to overestimate how much we really understand about the past. We look back on events and we think, oh yeah, that makes sense. I could have predicted that.
Oh, yeah, totally. Like when your favorite sports team wins and you're like, I knew they were going to pull it off.
Exactly.
Right.
But the truth is, we often underestimate the role of chance and uncertainty. We create these neat little narratives that make everything seem predictable after the fact.
But those narratives aren't always accurate, are they?
Not always.
Yeah.
It's like we're rewriting history to fit our current beliefs.
So it's not just about hindsight being 20/20. It's about our brains trying to create a coherent story, even if it means bending the truth a little.
Exactly. And this illusion can be dangerous because it can lead to overconfidence and a reluctance to learn from our mistakes.
Yeah, we need to be willing to admit when we were wrong and adjust our thinking accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, now let's shift gears a bit and talk about how our aversion to loss can influence our decisions.
Loss aversion, isn't that the idea that we hate losing more than we like winning?
That's the gist of it.
Yeah.
Losses loom larger in our minds than gains. Losing $100 feels way worse than the pleasure of gaining $100.
Oh, that explains why I have so much trouble getting rid of things even if I don't use them anymore.
It's the endowment effect. We tend to overvalue things we own simply because they're ours.
It's like that old sweater I never wear but can't bring myself to donate.
Exactly. And this aversion to loss can have a big impact on our decisions in all sorts of areas, from investing to negotiating to even our personal relationships.
So how do we avoid falling into those loss aversion traps?
One strategy is to try and reframe your perspective. Instead of focusing on what you might lose, think about what you might gain by making a different choice.
So it's about looking at the bigger picture.
Right. And that leads us to another interesting concept, framing.
Framing, what's that all about?
It's how the way information is presented can influence our choices, even if the underlying options are logically the same.
Oh, so it's like how a store might advertise something as 50% off instead of saying, you'll pay half price.
Exactly. The message is the same, but the framing makes it more appealing. A classic example is how choices shift when options are framed in terms of lives saved versus lives lost. People are more likely to choose a risky option when it's framed as avoiding losses, even if it means potentially losing more lives overall.
Wow, that's crazy. Just changing the wording can have a big impact on how we perceive the choices.
It really highlights the power of language and how it shapes our thinking.
So we've got these heuristics and biases and framing effects, all these little mental quirks that are constantly influencing our decisions.
It's a lot to keep track of, right?
It is. But I guess that's the point of this whole deep dive, to become more aware of these mental traps so we can avoid them.
Exactly. And there's one more concept I want to mention before we move on, regression to the mean.
Regression to the mean. I'm not sure I've heard of that one.
It's the tendency for extreme outcomes to be followed by more moderate ones. Like, if a student gets an unusually high score on a test, they're more likely to score closer to their average on the next test.
Oh, so it's like things tend to even out over time.
Right. It's why businesses that experience a sudden surge in profits often see their growth slow down, or why athletes who have a breakout season are likely to perform closer to their average the following year.
So it's important to keep this in mind when we're evaluating performance or making predictions.
Absolutely, because sometimes those extreme results are just due to chance and not necessarily a sign of lasting change.
This is also fascinating. It's like I'm seeing the world through a whole new lens.
I know what you mean. Kahneman's work really does challenge us to rethink how we think.
I'm ready for more. What else did Kahneman have to say? So we've uncovered all sorts of mental traps and biases in these first two parts of our deep dive into thinking fast and slow. But how do we actually use all this to make better decisions in our lives?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Well, Kahneman offers some pretty practical advice. One that he talks about is understanding our two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self.
Oh, right. Those two selves. Remind me about those again.
Okay, so the experiencing self is the one living in the moment. Right. Experiencing every sensation and feeling as it happens. And then there's the remembering self. That's the one that looks back on those experiences and creates the narrative of our lives.
Okay, yeah. I remember now. But they don't always agree, do they? Like, how we feel in the moment isn't always how we remember feeling later on.
You got it. And the thing is, the remembering self often gets to call the shots, even if it means the experiencing self might suffer a bit in the process.
Wait, really? How does that work?
Well, think about vacations. You plan this amazing trip, right? You spend weeks, maybe months, researching and booking everything. And you're imagining all these incredible memories you're going to make.
Oh, yeah, totally. I do that all the time.
But then you're actually on the vacation. And maybe things don't go exactly as planned. Or maybe you're so focused on getting the perfect pictures for Instagram that you forget to actually enjoy the moment.
Oh my gosh, yes. I'm so guilty of that.
And then when you look back on the trip, you might remember it more for the stressful moments or the things that didn't go perfectly, even if you had some really great experiences too.
It's like we're so focused on creating the perfect memory that we forget to just live the experience.
Exactly. And this bias can show up in other areas too, our careers, our relationships, how we spend our free time.
So how can we make sure our experiencing self gets a say in these decisions?
It's about being present, paying attention to how we feel in the moment, asking ourselves, am I actually enjoying this?
It's like giving ourselves permission to step off the treadmill and appreciate where we are right now.
Exactly. And that leads us to another interesting concept that Kahneman talks about, the focusing illusion.
The focusing illusion. Okay, I'm all ears. What's that about?
It's our tendency to overestimate the importance of whatever we're focused on at the moment.
So, like if I'm obsessing over a problem at work, I might start to think it's the biggest deal in the world, even though in the grand scheme of things, it's not really that important.
Exactly. Or if we're feeling lonely, we might overestimate how much happier we'd be if we were in a relationship. Or if we're struggling financially, we might think that money is the key to all our problems.
It's like whatever we're focused on becomes magnified in our minds.
Right. And that can lead us to make decisions that aren't really in our best interest. So it's important to try to zoom out and gain some perspective. Ask ourselves, will this matter a year from now, 5 years from now?
That's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the drama of the moment and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest takeaways from thinking fast and slow is that our intuition isn't always reliable.
Especially that system one intuition, right? It can be so convincing, but it's often based on those flawed mental shortcuts.
You got it. And Kahneman actually argues that in a lot of areas, simple algorithms can be more accurate than even the most experienced experts when it comes to making predictions.
Really? So you're saying it's sometimes better to trust the data than our own gut feelings?
It might sound counterintuitive, but research has shown it's often true, like in medicine. There are studies that show that structured algorithms can be better at diagnosing certain conditions than even experienced doctors.
That's pretty mind-blowing. It's like we think we're these brilliant, intuitive beings, but sometimes a simple formula can outperform us.
It's humbling, isn't it? It's not that human expertise isn't valuable. It's just that we need to be aware of our limitations and be open to using data and evidence to help us make better decisions.
It's like having a second opinion, but instead of asking another person, we're asking the data.
Exactly. And that's a big part of what Kahneman is trying to teach us in Thinking Fast and Slow. To recognize the biases in our thinking, to challenge our assumptions, and to embrace a more nuanced view of how our minds work.
It's a call to be more mindful, more deliberate, and more willing to admit when we're wrong.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And ultimately, to use that knowledge to make better choices and live more fulfilling lives.
Well said. I think that's a great place to wrap up our deep dive into Thinking Fast and Slow. This book has given us so much to think about.
It really has. And I hope our listeners will continue to explore these ideas and discover how they can apply them in their own lives.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being part of the Quicklit community. Please subscribe for get more videos like this.